think this, yeah. Nope. I don't know what's causing this problem.
Evening, everyone. Apologies, Riley's just having some technical difficulties. For the meantime, whilst he gets those sorted, so we can try and bring you some semblance of live show, I'm going to be taking the show for a second. I am just going to introduce our guest today, James Maple, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine. So let me just bring James in. James, hi. I'm really sorry about this. If you could just take us for a second and just give us a little bit of an update about what's happening in the conflict, a little bit about the news in Ukraine at the moment, that'd be great. James, are you there? It seems we're all having technical difficulties today, which isn't particularly handy. James, we can't hear you. I don't know if there's a different mic that you can connect. Thanks. This is incredible content. Thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. We're going to get everything sorted out as soon as possible so we can try and bring you something. Just to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. Once we get Riley back in.
Can you hear me all right?
James, yeah, perfect. How are you?
Sorry, I realised I was probably unmuted on my headset cable as well as being unmuted on the stream as well. But yeah, so I'm good.
Good. There's a slight echo, but I don't know what's happening. I think it might be something to do with StreamYard. If you could just take us through just a little bit of an update on the conflict at the moment, things as you see them, just sort of the latest for our viewers, that'd be great.
So yes, I believe the last time I was on the live stream. So I could still, I mean, it's still an echo or.
Yeah. Riley, are you with us?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
There seems to be an echo on your end now, which is great.
I mean, it's typical, isn't it? But
it is, yeah. So James, if you could try again, I don't know if there's still.
Let's try. So yeah, so I believe the last time we spoke, I think the conflict had just started. I think I was on the Thursday. It all kicked off, and I mean since then, it's been a bit of a disaster from the Russian side. I mean, I believe at the moment they are sort of northwest of Kyiv and sort of on the sort of northeastern part of the sort of Kievan suburbs, and have been very much been stalled, I think, as a result of logistics problems. And of course, the sort of situation in the south is less sort of promising at the moment from the Ukrainian side, because of we've got Mariupol, which is the sort of port city in the Donetsk oblast, which is being surrounded. Obviously, there's been sort of a humanitarian disaster there, and I think there's been various cases where I think Russia and Ukraine have negotiated for civilians to be evacuated, and then Russia sort of then shooting at those civilians trying to evacuate. And I believe those who are still trapped there are without food, without water, power, electricity, heat. So it is very grim there, and I sort of don't know how long they're going to be able to hold out for. And I think as well in Mykolaiv as well, which is also in the south of Ukraine, which is just east of Odessa, which I imagine if Russia, that would be one of Russia's next sort of big targets, which I think apart from I mean, a lot of Russia's strategy so far has been to use use of sort of short-range ballistic missiles, the Iskander missiles, as well as the Caliber cruise missiles. I think I saw a statistic that there's been about 900 missiles fired by the Russians throughout this whole conflict so far, which is why you've seen a lot of videos and photos of sort of residential buildings and infrastructure being damaged. Because I think Russia's kind of got to point where it's now just firing at civilian buildings just to cause sort of terror and panic, as well as sort of targeting sort of military infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Russia's strategy has just become more and more sort of barbaric
Yeah.
as this has gone on. And do you feel that that's because of the failure that they haven't like actually achieved what they want to achieve, or do you think it was always going to get more ugly even if things were swifter?
I mean, sort of going back from what I read, looking into people, what particularly sort of academics were predicting, it was either going to end in one of two ways. It was either going to be Russia getting a quick victory, with taking Kyiv within a day, and taking Odessa very quickly, um, and then being able to install their sort of puppet regime. But obviously that plan failed very quickly, and they've kind of resorted to a tactic they're used to using, which they've had a track record of using, which is basically to destroy civilian infrastructure. They did it in Grozny during the Chechen wars, or both Chechen wars of the sort of late 90s, early 2000s, and again in Aleppo, when the Russian military were involved there not so long ago.
Yeah. So is everything all right? You looked like you paused for a second. Is there? Do you want to?
No.
No. Right. All right. Good. Good. Yeah, I think that it's certainly it's a conflict that does seem to have spiraled a bit, and I think a lot of people, but obviously, the alternative in this situation, other than peace, which seems like Russia were never going to go for that, was a swift victory. But obviously, we're all very concerned and very heartbroken by what's happening in Ukraine. But what about like the domestic situation in Russia? How is that? Is there have the sanctions been having an impact on the population, on Putin's popularity? Is it possible to even really know that?
I don't believe it's affected Putin's popularity. I mean, I think what we've seen from Russia since the start of the conflict is the sort of state paranoia being ramped up to 100. I
Yeah.
mean, Russia. I mean, it always had censorship laws. It particularly over sort of media. It's never. I mean, in recent times, I mean, it's kind of wanted to control social media, particularly Western social media. Sort of trying to be is sort of inspired by the China and its kind of the Great Firewall, as it's called. But I think this since the war started, this is kind of the first time that ever Russia's shut down Western social media. I mean, Facebook wasn't particularly popular in Russia. They use Kontaktia, which is their kind of equivalent. But Instagram, I think, is certainly popular. But in terms of the sort of domestic situation, I think there's been number of incidents um, of people in queues lining up at banks trying to get money out, and then finding, and particularly those who've got access to who had access to foreign currency, struggling to get that out of the banks. And I saw yesterday there in some areas they've shortage of sugar, and grain as well, which is sort of hard to believe given Russia is a sort of mass produces a lot of grain. And of course, a lot of you would have seen last night what happened, the clips from Russia's sort of national television, sort of state television. I think it was kind of like its equivalent of like the BBC One 10 o'clock news, where you had one of the editors come on with a large piece of paper protesting against the war, and which was she was pretty much on there for about 3 seconds, and then sort of forcibly removed, and we sort of didn't know what happened to her until it was announced sort of a few hours ago that she'd been in court, and she was given what was essentially a £200 fine, or 30,000 ruble fine, and I think 10 days of community service or jail, which is very interesting and very suspicious, given that you've seen lots of clips of people being rounded up who are protesting on the streets of Russia and given 15-year sentences, which has also been a new bit of legislation which was introduced by the State Duma, which is the Russian parliament. So for those who were protesting against the war, would be given a 15-year maximum prison sentence. So there's something quite suspicious about that case of that news editor only been given what sort of a sort of slap on the wrist, essentially, whereas you're getting those who are protesting on the streets given 15-year prison sentences.
Yeah, that is really interesting, because it seems like she would have a lot more reach
Yeah,
from that.
it was interesting because, I mean, on sort of read about it. I mean, sort of the Ukrainian perspective on it was that they kind of don't buy into it too much, because she was kind of she also released, I don't know if many people saw it, a video. I believe that was kind of posted on social media before she did the protest, and what she was saying was very much, she said that the war was a crime, that she was against Putin, but she kind of still sort of spouted very sort of familiar Russian nationalist rhetoric, that and particular rhetoric which is kind of one of the factors, the reason why Russia is involved in Ukraine, the idea of Russia and Ukraine being fraternal nations, that they are two nations apart and they must come together, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think Zelensky's kind of credited her on her bravery, but you sort of you also do wonder, maybe if the state had any Russian state had anything to do with it, maybe to sort of show to the public this is what happens to those who do protest.
Wow, that I hadn't considered that before. That that it could be a sort of false,
It,
a
it
false protest.
it wouldn't surprise me. There's this kind of, pretty much since the early 2000s with Russian media, there's been this kind, what we call sort of political technology. It's kind of the sort of making it's been a very sort of common trend in Russian politics to make it seem sort of real but really just be fake. And
Yeah.
I mean, since the early 2000s, Putin pretty much and his sort of cronies kind of bought up a lot of the state private media companies at the time, and they became state media companies, which the state could control, and therefore sort of produce state propaganda. Um, so it's entirely it wouldn't be surprising if this was if this was kind of maybe little pre-planned, or because you I don't think there's ever been anything like this on a in a live studio before on Russian national
Hmm.
television, and surely they would have security there. So I'm a bit sort of suspicious of it all, when you kind of look into it a bit further.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating, albeit incredibly concerning. But moving on to like the actually, no, we should address this question first. I was going to ask another question. Could you see Putin being overthrown because of protests and or sanctions? What do you think?
Um, It's yeah, I'm a bit skeptical. I feel very skeptical about Putin being overthrown as a result of this, but I think that's purely because, from what I've studied of the Putin regime, it's been it's firstly who's going to overthrow him. I mean,
Mm.
The Russian state, as I've mentioned, have had a clamped down on any sort of civil society protest. You've obviously videos of any kind of even there was someone holding a blank piece of paper, they were taken away, put in a police van, and then taken to the nearest station. But you kind of look further in towards the more sort of elite circles around the Kremlin, and there are sort of two groups who potentially you would think that they was the kind of would have the potential to overthrow Putin, and you've got obviously the oligarchs, who I presume we'll talk about in a bit about the sanctions, and of course at the moment um, Putin has been sort of very bad business for them at the moment. But the oligarchs have a kind of a sort of long history with Putin since he kind of came to power. He sort of Putin wanted to sort of stamp his authority on them by saying, "You're not getting involved in politics. I'll let you get away with your sort of corrupt business dealings and practices as long as you do not interfere." There was a known case of an oligarch called Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was an owner of a I think energy company called Yukos, who got on the wrong side of Putin and then ended up in prison and then has been exiled. Um, and uh, um, and so the oligarchs in Russia very much fear Putin, but they've I think for a long time they have been sort of financing him and through using dark money and those kind of sort of illegal practices. And then the other group who could potentially overthrow Putin. I say this more in the hypothetical context, and this is called the Siloviki, which means sort of strong men. And this has been this group has been a very prominent part of sort of Russian elite politics since the early 2000s, since Putin came to power. The Siloviki are essentially ex-KGB and ex-FSB members. And I think what we've seen under Putin as well is that those who are ex KGB and ex FSB sometimes end up either through like almost like a system of patronage, end up in control of certain sort of mineral and gas and oil companies, or even defense companies as well. But it was very interesting. I think it was about a week or so ago that Putin did one of his kind of sort of seems like sort of sort of recorded, sort of done for the cameras discussions with his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, who I think this was when they announced about Putin wanting to deploy the nuclear forces. And Shoigu looked very kind of nervous, and you could tell by his body language he looked very uncomfortable. But yeah, the other factor I think, which for those who would be considering replacing getting rid of Putin, is who replaces him, and that's the ultimate question. And I think what a lot of people in Russia fear is the 90s, and the 90s was a period where the state was very weak. You had hyperinflation at the time because of the kind of transition from communism and its sort of command economy to then a free market economy. Um, and and at that, and of course that was kind of like the period when you had the sort of Russian mafia were sort of prominent. I mean, they were kind of towards the end of the Soviet Union, but they were more so during the 90s. And the 90s was a very sort. I was often told that the 90s are you can't explain Putin without discussing the 90s in Russia, because that was kind of the context, the background to which sort of led to his sort of ascent.
Yeah. Right. I think that's all we have time for, James. But thank you very much for coming on the show and bearing with us while we had those bizarre technical difficulties. I still don't know what happened there. But thank you very much for coming on, James Maple.
Thank you for having me.
Right. So we've talked about Ukraine. It has to be discussed. It's probably the most important thing going on in the world right now in politics, geopolitics, in any case. But obviously, there's other things that we want to talk about. So the next thing I want to discuss on the show is this guy called Nick Fuentes. For those of you who have heard of him, my condolences, because this guy is really something else. So Nick Fuentes is a far-right political commentator in the US, and there's plenty of them, right? But this guy is perhaps the worst. He is quite well known in conservative circles in America for feuding with Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, one of the co-founders of Turning Point USA, for them not being conservative enough. And just for a bit of context, Turning Point USA, argues in favor of almost entirely like free market economy, like no healthcare provided by the government. I'm not even sure they support education being provided by the government. They've been huge opponents of the Black Lives Matter movement. This is an organization full of people who, think that there is no problem with institutionalized racism and police brutality in America. People, most of whom don't think we should do anything about climate change. A lot of them don't think it exists. And they apparently weren't conservative enough for Nick Fuentes. And the reason we're talking about him is because he has launched a new free speech platform. And he has said something really, really fascinating about that. So
Cozy
I think we
TV,
have
like
a clip.
how do you get on Cozy TV?
Well, we're rolling it out. We're bringing on streamers every week. So we did 3 last week, 3 this week. We're going to do 3 next week, the week after that, and so on. We'll probably bring on a ton of people in December. This is just the beta test right now. Why do you want to go on
so
there?
far. I like it.
I know.
Like the way the entire website's set up, like it looks pretty professional.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the website. I'm just wondering why you let people like me on who but maybe I just misunderstand.
Well, I'm feeling like it's more like a free speech website. I'm thinking you can say whatever you want, doesn't matter. Am I right or wrong, Nick?
You're correct. Yeah, it's free speech, no censorship. We are anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-black, anti-Semitic.
God.
That's basically
Yeah,
the theme,
holy
because
shit,
everything
this website
else
looks-
is every other way.
Okay. I've already seen that clip, obviously, because we don't just do these shows on the fly, despite what you might think, judging by today's technical difficulties. But it still just blows my mind how that guy can say that. I think it's important to recognize that even if he does kind of sort of believe what he's saying, that these kind of people, these right-wing political commentators, whether in the UK, in America, in Brazil, in Germany, wherever they are, they always do things to, stir up people's hatred, but also people's confusion and people's outrage, and even people's ridicule, because I think that can often lead them to creating a sort of response from the audience who agrees with them, because they can paint the people who are like ridiculing them about being absolutely stupid or like batshit crazy, and by saying, well, you're just clearly you're an out of touch elitist liberal, and you just think that everyone needs to be like you, and you look down on conservatives and think they're stupid. I think it's all part of the grift, right? It's all part of the grift. But it must be said that it is an absolutely incredible paradox to say that something is a free speech platform, and then immediately afterwards to say, oh, but we're all, we're anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-black, and anti-Semitic, or absolutely amazing that he could even those words could even come out of his mouth. And it's kind of slightly humorous as it is, it's really, really worrying, because there's a problem in America. There's a rot at the heart of American politics, but not just American politics, American culture, American society, in the American psyche as well. People like that are getting through to people, and they're not just getting through to them by being cruel and charismatic speakers and, you know, being kind of a bit dishonest when, you know, they do like Ben Shapiro-esque owning liberals with facts and logic kind of videos. You know, they're not doing that. Well, they are doing that, but not just with that. It's now a point where the reality of basic facts and basic recent events is totally up for debate. People just don't believe things that have objectively happened. So we've got Channel 5's 5 News clip here of some conspiracy theorists at a trucker, a right-wing, very right-wing trucker protest. Let's have a watch and talk about it.
Doing the right thing. He's taken out the Syrian mafia. The man's not an evil man. Here's the thing, the media is doing what they're doing and sharing the, excuse my French, the crap about him because he's over the target.
Do you think there's even a war going on out there?
No, not at all.
They can easily fake a war if they wanted to. All they would do is just like film a few things. And
are you aware that the majority of the pictures that they've been showing regarding the alleged war in Ukraine are from prior conflicts and are unrelated to Ukraine?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
We shouldn't have anything to do with it at all. Let them figure out their own mess.
The deep state has always made Putin to look like the bad guy, but he's a good guy.
Freedom! Truckers of America are ready!
So, aside from that one guy screaming freedom and looking like one of those screaming goats that was like super viral on the internet in like 2012, that's really upsetting. And it speaks to the problem that we're talking about here. There's a huge number of people in America now, and I think a lot of people in Europe and other Western countries don't see it as much and don't know about how much of a huge problem this is, because almost all of the tourist destinations in America, all the places we go, if we can, you know, if we're lucky enough to be able to go on holiday, is somewhere more progressive, more liberal. You know, the only place that's a bit Republican is Florida, that a lot of tourists tend to go to. So we're not in that world, but there are a hell of a lot of places in America where huge chunks of the population genuinely believe things like this. So a guy there saying that there isn't a war in Ukraine, and another woman who agreed with that statement, that there is no war, that Vladimir Putin is actually a good guy. And this is, I mean, I saw a video the other day on Instagram of a similar thing. It's a perfect example of doublethink. You know, this concept from 1984, and I know people always bring up 1984, and it's like super overdone, but it's quite an interesting concept, this idea that a person, due to incredibly persistent, powerful and effective indoctrination, manipulation and propaganda from the state and or very powerful corporations, can hold two totally contradictory beliefs in their head at the same time. You can be, this guy is a patriot, I'm sure he thinks, right? But also he thinks that the American deep state are the bad guys, the American government's the bad guys, and the Russian government are the good guys. They can hold these two very contradictory views. And I'm sure by his own account, supporting the US over another country is something that makes you patriotic. And if you do the opposite, then you're not patriotic. I'm sure he would say that, right? But I mean, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he wouldn't. Fundamentally, what he's saying is so far from the truth. What they're all saying is so removed from reality that it's really, it's very dangerous for a democracy. I'm sort of paraphrasing, but I can't remember who it was. It was some philosopher or something. It might be like Socrates. Said something along the lines of, democracy without education is just demagoguery, right? If someone can speak well, if someone is charming or they're funny, or or you get constant barrage of the same absolute BS news stories fed into your brain, news stories, obviously just misinformation, not actually true, then and you don't have the critical thinking skills for it, you don't have the right education, the right news information, then democracy ceases to exist, really, because people are just being manipulated. The truth, objective reality, no longer matters, and that's what's happening in America right now. And it's a small problem in lots of places, including the UK, but it's especially bad in the States. And I think that's something that people need to wake up to, because democracy cannot survive very long at all in a situation like that. So we've got another story here about well, I think this is a little more upbeat, I suppose, about an anarchist group squatting at a Russian oligarch's home in London. So we've got a video of this here, so have a watch.
Fucking scumbag! Not you! That's what you fucking are! That's what you're doing! You know how many Ukrainian people woke up and saw us and saw that London cared? This is the reaction they get. You are giving Putin a propaganda tool. Look at you! Armed and skilled for peaceful protesters. Shame on you! Shame on you! Shut the fuck up, you pig! Oi! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you! Fucking pig! Fucking pig! Fucking pig! Get a real fucking job!
So, for a bit more information about what actually happened there. So, this anarchist group are very, clearly very, very agitated by what is going on in Ukraine, and the fact that the UK really hasn't implemented nearly strong enough sanctions on Russian oligarchs. Oligarchs shouldn't even exist in the first place, let alone be able to support an illegal war and still have all their money and their wealth or whatever, right? So the police responded to them breaking in and squatting there, but the Met responded to criticism because they sent a lot of coppers there. They sent people in riot gear, and it was a very, very fast response. So it seemed like they were doing a lot more to protect the home of a Russian oligarch than they would do for any ordinary break-in in London. And this is what they said. I think we have the Twitter thread. This is what the anarchists said on their sort of mini manifesto. But here is the thread from the Met. They said that officers were initially called to reports of people breaking into a house just after 1 a.m. This led to an immediate response and would do so anywhere in London. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't live in London, but I don't think that very rapid response with police in riot gear, vans full of coppers, like a dozen coppers, is a usual ordinary response to every break-in in London. I don't think that happens. In fact, I think partially because of cuts, yes, but also partially because of the Met being incompetent and allegedly, arguably, maybe a little corrupt. Who knows? They might not even go to a lot of calls of a break-in, right? And the Met has destroyed their image, their credibility recently, destroyed it because of the whole Partygate thing, right? With the government having parties during lockdown, and they have refused to investigate them. Apparently, they just can't do it, right? There's been constant delay, constant dithering, and they've refused when there's very obviously been criminal action. In fact, Boris Johnson basically admitted to breaking the law, and then the Met were like, no, you didn't, you know, kind of thing. And they've done sort of bits and pieces, but they haven't launched like a proper investigation into that. It took them a very long time to do anything at all. But if a bunch of anarchists break into a Russian oligarch's house while Russia is invading Ukraine, then, you know, send an army. That's apparently, you know, the Met. That's where their priorities are. And I think that was just another thing to add to the list of why the Met has zero credibility anymore. And that's very, very worrying, because, you know, the more essential tools of society, the more essential institutions of society need to have credibility, because then things start to fall apart if they don't. And the police force is one of the most important ones, because otherwise people just view them as, you know, as sort of a tool for the elites and the state and the ultra wealthy and this kind of thing. But you know, that's the Met. You know, they've repeatedly punched themselves in the face recently. Now we come to my favorite segment of the show, hot take of the week, and we have a very special hot take of the week this time. I mean, they're all special, but this is a big one, because it is from the richest man in the world. It's from Elon Musk. As I'm sure you all know, Elon Musk, the billionaire who's in charge of Tesla and SpaceX, and has shares in many different other companies, including a company that, when I heard about it, I was very excited about, but now I think is something dystopian from some sort of nightmarish science fiction novel, Neuralink, where they've been experimenting on apes and monkeys with brain implants. So the guy is pretty sketchy. A lot of people acknowledge that he's done a lot of harm, especially to his workers, to unions in America and around the world. But he did say something that I think most people would agree with. He said, "Hold strong, Ukraine," on Twitter recently. That was on the 4th of March there. And this is what he said yesterday on the 14th. "I support the current thing." Now, I know that Elon is a cool, edgy meme lord, and all the dude bros love him. And the only reason I will ever criticize him is just because I'm jealous at how he's so much smarter and richer than I am. But I do think that's a little bit fucked up, right? The inclusion of the Ukraine flag in this thing, apparently mocking sort of the way that, you know, social movements have become almost like trends in some ways. Because social movements, they do ebb and flow, but yeah, I guess sometimes nowadays they get commodified a little bit. Who do they get commodified by? The giant corporations run by Elon Musk's buddies. So I don't really get his criticism there. But Elon, I mean, what is there to say about Elon Musk that hasn't already been said? This is a guy who, you know, who started Tesla from the ground up, except he didn't. He's not actually a co-founder. He bought the position of co-founder and then made the original founders sign an NDA so they couldn't tell, so the public didn't find out. You know, this is a guy who has been like revolutionizing space travel, except no, he hasn't. He's not even an engineer. He doesn't have an engineering background. He has a business and I think computer science and physics, as far as I'm aware, background. He's not the one responsible for these, frankly, quite incredible rockets that go, you know, that deliver whatever kind of ship and then can come back and land themselves, which is fantastic. But that's not him, right? There's so many engineers. There's so many hardworking people who make that happen. And he ain't one of them. You know, this is the guy who, you know, apparently is, you know, giving all of this money away to charity. And to be fair to him, he has given quite large sums to charity, but not as much as he says. He doesn't pay nearly as much in taxes as would be fair for him. He has all this money, and he pays a very, very small marginal tax rate, often lower than working class and middle class people in America. And of course, the guy who started from the ground up, started from nothing, except actually, he didn't start from nothing. His parents ran an apartheid-era emerald mine. And you can imagine just how ethical that might have been. Who knows? So Elon Musk is someone who sort of enchanted the world with this false idea that he was somehow like a real-life Iron Man, a real-life Tony Stark. And the truth, unfortunately, is he's more of a Lex Luthor. But Jeff Bezos is actually bald, so I feel like he gets that title. But so and that would be bad enough, wouldn't it? But Elon in recent years has come out with all of these things about trans people and being, you know, quite socially conservative, saying that measures to protect workers at the expense of private profit through like lockdowns and things during the coronavirus pandemic was somehow fascist, because fascism is well known for protecting vulnerable working people and the disabled from threats at the expense of corporate profits. Jack says here, it suits rich people like Musk to mock people wanting to change the status quo because he's one of the few that it benefits. Yeah, exactly. You know, things are looking pretty good from where he's sitting. Things are looking pretty tasty. So why would he want to change things? Yeah, so that's our hot take of the week. Elon Musk, big brain man-child, who quite frankly is the most divorced person I've ever seen. He just screams divorce. But look, if you see a hot take that's as good or even better than this one, then send them to the show, because we'd absolutely love to get some of your suggestions, because there are so many out there, so many absurd right-wing takes, you know, terrible cringy memes like the one we just saw from Elon Musk, or, you know, ridiculous opinions that aren't based in fact at all. I saw one from Sophie Corcoran, who's a right-wing political commentator in the UK recently, where she said that she just wants the government to stop spending, despite the fact that if the government stopped spending, we would default on all of our debts. We would no longer have any infrastructure. We would no longer fund healthcare or education or industry. All of the companies that are relying on government investment would collapse, and the economy would cease to function, and society would generally just turn to dust. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there. I'm sure you'll find it. Yeah, so send them in if you want. Last quick story that we have tonight, and I know we've been going for a while tonight, particularly because of the technical difficulties we had at the start, and apologies again for that. But last thing I want to talk about is something quite near and dear to my heart. So as you all know, the situation in Ukraine has meant that there have been some sanctions placed in the UK on Russian oligarchs. Not many, and they seem to be kind of putting them off a bit and making an exception for Roman Abramovich, who's the owner of Chelsea Football Club. He appears to be going, but the club isn't handling this whole situation very well. And they have a match soon against my home team. As you can probably hear from my accent, I am from the northeast, but specifically I'm from sort of around the Middlesbrough area, and Middlesbrough is my team, and they're playing Borough very soon. And this is a statement that Chelsea made about the game. So they said, "We are disappointed to announce we will not be able to sell tickets for Saturday's FA Cup tie at Middlesbrough." And they go on talking, waffling a bit, but the biggest thing to take away from it, and if you want, if you're watching this live, or if you're not watching this live, just give it a pause and have a look. But they said that it's important for the competition that the match against Middlesbrough goes ahead. However, it is with extreme reluctance that we are asking the FA board to direct the game to be played behind closed doors for matters of sporting integrity. Now, I could say a lot of things about that, but you've been watching me talk for ages, so let's just see what Borough said in response. Borough said, "We are aware of Chelsea's request to have Saturday's Emirates FA Cup 6th round tie played behind closed doors and find their suggestion both bizarre and without any merit whatsoever." So, my fabulous home team, this makes me very, very proud to be from Teesside, are having none of it, right? And they've said, given the reasons for these sanctions, I have to get a bit closer to the screen. Given the reasons for these sanctions, for Chelsea to seek to invoke sporting integrity as reason for the game being played behind closed doors is ironic in the extreme. So there you have it. From now on, if we ever talk about sporting things again, I'll just contact Borough and they can lay the absolute smack down, because they've said it better than I ever could. Ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and insulting to Chelsea fans as well as Borough fans, and the whole of Middlesbrough Football Club. You know, those tickets will help our club and it'll help our local economy, and it's incredibly disappointing that Chelsea would do that. But of course, they think they're above us. They think they're better than us, because we're just little Middlesbrough, you know. But, you know, we wipe the floor with Man U and wipe the floor with Tottenham. So we'll see. I mean, I've never wanted to beat a team more now, but we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, you know, we've got the high ground, haven't we? So yeah, I just thought that was a cool little story to add there. Made me very proud to be from Teesside. So thank you all very, very much for watching. Again, I apologise for the technical difficulties that we had at the start. Still not really sure why that happened. We'll do some sort of troubleshooting after the stream ends. But I appreciate you all watching very much and bearing with us. Thanks again to James Maple for giving us some fantastic information and his expertise on the situation in Ukraine and the situation in Russia. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.